Hello everybody, welcome to the mid-afternoon session, one of the toughest sessions. I like to get crowd photos and I usually get them at the start of the session before everyone's asleep. This is a talk about 3 letters. You're either here because you're pedantic or you're looking for the wrong room. The 2-letter talk, Jack's talking about AI down the other end. This is more letters. I can include AI if you want, or I can leave it completely out. Who wants me to add AI to this talk? Or who's had enough of that already? Done. Give the people what they want. I'm a software consultant. I've worked with more companies than I can probably remember over the last 20 years. I've built a lot of MVPs in that time, myself and teams that I've been involved in. They've all gone well. Defining them is usually the hardest part. So that's the very start of the process, is just getting an understanding of what we're actually talking about. So we're going to talk about what viable means, how minimal things should be, what even constitutes a product at the end of it, and whether you should actually be building one at all yourself. I am that guy. I'm a consulting director and a principal consultant at 6pivot. We're Australian and New Zealand now. We've got one guy in New Zealand, so we can say we're a multinational software consultancy. Fairly small, we've got about 40 people. I've been writing code. Every time I have to update this slide, I feel a little bit older. Writing code for a long time, practicing agile, leading projects, etc. And we have done many MVPs in that time as well. I want to know a little bit about you, so I know who we're talking to. Hands up if your primary role is delivery, software development, writing code. Okay, hands up if you're more about controlling the scope of a project. Did anyone put hands up if you put your hand up twice? 1. You should know all of this then already, because you have to argue with yourself about this stuff. First, I want to thank the sponsors. I like to do that. I'm also a DDD Brisbane organiser, and I look after sponsorship. I know what these events cost to run, and you literally cannot run them without it. They are not lying when they say that your ticket price barely covers your food. Ours doesn't. Without the sponsors, you can't do it. So do go and give them some of your time, talk to them, give them a bit of exposure. That's why they're here. If you want to do this event again next year, please make it worth their while to come back as well. So please do go and talk to them. So let's kick off. What is an MVP? Who actually thinks, just a show of hands, who thinks they could give me a definition right now? Or we could just wrap this whole thing up quicker than the last talk. I've got one maybe and a maybe, but it might not be the best. All right, so I did look it up, and this is what I found. This is what MVP means. We are talking about a minimal viable product. That's what MVP means to us today. No? Clapping's too much, please. Okay, so I've nailed the minimum part, right? Minimum viable presentation done. I've worked with a lot of developers over the years that lean too hard on the minimum when we're working on MVPs. And I've worked with a lot of marketing teams, founders, CEOs, etc., who lean too hard on the product side of it. They want to have everything in their MVP. But they still want it in a week because they're calling it MVP a week, you know. So that's sort of where this session came from, is just trying to get an understanding of why it's so hard for us all. They're 3 words, but there's so much confusion about what they actually mean. So that's why we're here. I like to start with what it's not. It's not a most valuable product. I've heard that thrown around before. Cool concept, but that's not what a minimum viable product is. A most valuable product is going to have every feature that every user needs and somehow not be completely bloated like every other 20-year-old product that you've used that's had every feature, photo op, that's had every feature added to, to appease everybody. Think, for the .NET developers, think about what Visual Studio's become over the last 20 years. Think about what the Jira suite has become over the last 20 years. You add more and more features to appease everybody and you get the most Because if you don't add them, then there's always someone complaining that it's missing something, but that's so far from what a minimum viable product is. It's definitely not that. It's not this next term that I do love though, which is a minimum lovable product. I usually hear that from non-developers. I hear that from marketing teams or whoever's actually got the idea for a product. I think it's cute. I think it's a great way to talk to investors. I don't think it helps when you're talking about how you're going to scope this project. A minimum lovable project might still have more than you need to make it viable. Viable's probably here, lovable's probably here, and the most valuable's probably out here. It's not a demo. Is anyone here old enough to remember demos? You used to buy PC Power Mag, it would come with a CD and you'd have a 30-day. Yeah, a few people that are happy to admit it. So a demo is usually fully spec'd out, but you only get it for a period of time. You want to try it before you buy it. It's not that, because our thing, a minimum viable, that's not very minimal. It's a minimum amount of time you can use it, but it's not minimum enough to try and get to market early or whatever your driver is. It's not a proof of concept. A proof of concept doesn't have to look anything like what you're actually building. We've done lots of proof of concepts for people in the past, and all your proof of concept needs to do is validate your idea that you've got. I think we might be able to solve this new problem this way. Cool, we could build you a 50 grand MVP, or we could actually knock up this spreadsheet in a couple of days just to test your theory out and see if that works or not. Minimum viable product proof of concept does not need to look at all like the finished product. We are just trying to validate if something's got legs or not. So it's none of those things, and it's obviously not your V2 or your V3 that's got all the features in it. It is the minimum set of features required to deliver a viable product. And that probably sounds obvious, but each of those words has caveats, and we'll talk about them. So we've got these three components, right? And it might look like this, might look like this, might look like this, and there's no right or wrong answer. Who came here hoping for one definition they can leave here with and argue with people about? Sorry. It's not too late to hit the AI talk. Unfortunately, and I hate saying it because it's the running joke about consultants, but it depends. It depends on your product, your team, your customer, your client, your reasons for building an MVP. But that's what we're going to work through here and work out what sort of questions we need to ask to work that out. So you're not going to get a single, look, you can take that definition. If you need a screenshot, you can take that, but it's not going to solve the arguments that you're having. So we'll work through these and work out where we actually want. We'll start with medium, right? So we might have 6 awesome features in our backlog for our new application. For our MVP, we can have a choice about what we're going to do. We're not going to build all of them, or we're not going to completely build all of them. Do we build, or how do we make this product a minimum version of it? Do we build a minimum implementation of lots of different features? Do we have a minimum number of features fully implemented and we leave other features out? What does fully implemented even mean? Got some visuals around this to help you think about it in a minute. Viability. What does this product need to succeed? Can we get users? Do we have a revenue model? Can we maintain it? These are questions that you should be asking even if you're not building an MVP, if it's just a version 1 or whichever, and you're bypassing an MVP phase and you just want to go straight for it. You still need to be asking these questions. And when I say you still need to, everyone that put their hand up that's a developer that think they have no control over the scope, you can still be asking these questions too, and you should. It's not about challenging your bosses and thinking that, making them think that you don't think that they know what they're talking about or they haven't thought these things out or anything, but it's about establishing a shared understanding. Hopefully they've got answers for all of these things. But if you have those answers too, it just helps your thinking about how you approach problems, even if it's just how to build the next feature. I worked on a product for around 18 months that was fully feature complete. It was mainly consultants building it, which makes it expensive. And we got to the end, we'd done everything right. We'd had UX designers in, we'd started all the way back with personas and workshops and all this sort of stuff. We'd had journeys, we built this fantastic product. We'd had really early engagement with the first pilot users, so the first people we're going to sell to. We'd brought them in really early in the project, so we were validating the features we were building with real users, not just with the boss or the domain expert who thinks, no, it's okay, I know what the users want. This was something running in trucks, and we were out at depots at 5 o'clock in the morning with the truck drivers validating these things as we went. Did absolutely everything right. Got to the end of the product, shelved. And if my voice cracked a little bit, it's because it still hurts. A lot of your life goes into a product sometimes, and then just to have it thrown away at the end. Has that happened to anybody? Yeah, it hurts, doesn't it? And you want to walk away going, it's just a job, I still got paid. But for me, it hurts. It's like, no, I put a lot of effort into that, a lot of mental energy, and it was for nothing other than getting paid, which I love. But it hurt. And the reason was this stuff hadn't been answered. So there wasn't a marketing team to actually go and sell it. They had this one customer that might have used it. They didn't have a support model set up for it, so there was nobody to answer a phone if somebody rang up and had an issue. Everything around it that wasn't actually code was great. Well, I think so. Code was great, but we hadn't sorted out the rest of the viability of actually launching this product. So particularly in MVPs, you need to think about this, but that's even wider reaching than that. And when it comes to a product, we need to think about, are people going to use it? What do they want or need? We don't care what they want, we actually care about what they need. We care about what they want, but in an MVP, we are more concerned about what they need, because that helps the scope conversations. How much can you remove before it's not a product anymore, before it feels more like a demo? A product needs to be something that still fills a need. It needs to completely fill a need to a point where someone is prepared to pay money for it, because it does make their life easier. If you half build a product and you can put all of your data into it, but then you can't do anything with it, that's not going to fill the need. So you still need to make it enough that it's really the test, is will someone give you money for this thing? And this is where we differentiate between a demo, a proof of concept, or something else. A product can be used by real people with real problems for real solutions. Now, like I said before, say we've got 6 awesome features in our backlog for our new application. And for our MVP, we've got a choice. How much of this are we going to build? Now, these could be anything. I've left these blank intentionally so that you can fit them into your mind. It's a blank canvas for you. So you can think of these as your dashboard, your admin screens, your authentication, your single sign-ons, your whatever. Just think about 6 big things in whatever that you're working on, or that idea you've had in the back of your head for a long time. Now, when we'll go and talk to a founder with this idea, we'll say, all right, so I like this idea of an MVP, so tell me about it. And we'll say, all right, well, the idea is to just build enough. You cut it back to the bare bones of what we think is still going to be a viable product, and we get that out, and we can start getting feedback or revenue or whatever your driver is. And they say, cool, let's do that, which is not much. But this is the start of the conversation, and it's great, but it's a start. There's a lot more to be done. This is what people will say they think it should be, but that is still going to cost 90% of the entire gold-plated product that they've got in their head. So it's not what we're talking about. I appreciate you, by the way, the one person nodding. Give me confidence that I'm being heard. I've got some examples in the next ones about products that we've built in the past and how we split these features up, because there's a bunch of different ways you can slice them, and you can think about these with your own ones as well. One that we built for mining, we went with something like this. We wanted a little bit of all of the features so that, remember, they still have to be viable features in that they still did enough that a client could use them. But think about, maybe read as reports. We built the 2 most important reports. We didn't build the 20 that we think people are going to want. Think about, the orange might be authentication. We did a standard sort of auth workflow. We didn't do single sign-on with 6 other providers and, that sort of thing. That's always on the enterprise tier, and if you're not honest about it, it'll be on the products page on the enterprise tier that says call us for pricing. And that tier says it does all of these things, but it doesn't do those things. But if you call us for pricing, we'll build them for you. Don't be that company. So this one we built it this way. We built a shallow piece of each of the features so that we could deliver value to a wider range of customers to get them on board, because their model was, we've got X number of dollars to get something out to market, and we need to start getting revenue back on it. This was their approach to getting revenue. They had four or five key customers they wanted to target. This is the feature set they needed to do to get each of them on board. Once that revenue starts coming in, they can start building out the rest of the products. And they can start getting the feedback from those customers to work out which one they actually think. And of course, customer one's going to want all of the green one, and customer two is going to want all of the orange one. But that's a whole other conversation. So this is one, and it worked well. And they've now got their own full-time developer based on the revenue they're getting in, because they were able to sell this, which is great. This is another one that we built just recently. Launched it this year, now has paying customers. In this one, you can think of the right-hand side. We didn't touch a whole bunch of features that are on the backlog. That's long-term stuff that we de-scoped. So that was things like, yeah, and we want to make this white labelable and make it a SaaS product and multi-tenanted. And we're like, yeah, awesome ideas for later. And that's the most powerful thing you can say in these conversations is, that is a great idea. Let's do that in version 2 or version 3 or version X, and help them build a roadmap so that they can see where that is. If you just dismiss and say, no, I don't think we should do that, then you quickly just get into a, well, I think we should conversation. So for this one, we didn't build a bunch of features. We did build, hard to visualize, and we've got NDAs, so I can't talk about them in a way that makes sense, unfortunately. But we did build full slices of features, but not the whole features. They're feature complete top to bottom, but there's more we could do for those features. Think about a user story that you've maybe knocked off, 3 of the acceptance criteria. Kind of the gold plating is the stuff on the side, but it does everything you need. They could just be a little bit better, and we'll get there. It's on the backlog, but as the money starts coming in, you can pay for that stuff. Because their driver, again, like the first one, they were also driven to an MVP by funding. They were funding it themselves. They didn't have, big enterprise backing to do it. So it was just, what can we do to get out to start getting the revenue back in to fund the rest of it? We did one like this, which was a bit of a combination. This was one that we launched years ago. I can talk about this one. This was a product called MotoDNA that we built, which is a digital motorcycle training coach. This one has one big thing that it needed to do perfectly. The motivation for this guy, again, he was funding it himself. A lot of MVPs that come to us are people that are funding themselves. His motivation was he wanted something that he could take to investors for a round of funding, that he could say, look, I've got X number of users already using this system, already paying for this system. So what do we need to do in terms of an MVP to get buy-in from enough users that I can use that in my funding pitches? And for him it was, we needed this digital algorithm absolutely perfect. So that was a bulletproof, gold-plated feature that we built the whole thing of. And then a sprinkle of a couple other features just to give users enough to be interested in the other stuff that you could potentially do. There's a lot more you could do in those areas if we had the time and money, but they're the ones that we cut back. But this one here is end-to-end, and it's a pretty cool product. As a very quick tangent, I stick a GoPro on my motorbike, I go and do some pre-configured things, activities in a car park or something. I upload my GoPro data, and we uses the accelerometer data and the gyros and such to work out how you were riding, what your bike position was like, your acceleration, deceleration, cornering angles, and all that sort of stuff. And then it will coach you for a 5% improvement, and then another 5%, and then another 5%. Very cool. Hasn't really gone anywhere because it didn't have the marketing plan behind it. It's an amazing product, and I stand by that. It is an amazing product, but it's largely been shelved as well because it didn't have the marketing team behind it either. So, succeeded in minimal product, skipped the viability part. And you can just, you can make any mix of these bars as you like to go through them. It really depends on your situation as to what you're doing. One question that I like to pretend for the sake of this talk that I get asked all the time is, how big is an MVP? This is a tree map that I put together based on budgets of past MVP projects that we've done at work. So this is real data, anonymised obviously, but these are all projects that we've delivered that we do consider successful MVPs. Most of them are small. There is an enormous thing up there because you don't have to be a bootstrapped person with an idea to build an MVP. The big one was one of the largest enterprises in Australia that we built an MVP for. It was much bigger, but we still applied the same MVP logic to it. They had timelines that they needed to hit. So it wasn't about getting a particular, it wasn't about getting a particular bunch of users onboarded. This is just, this is line of business sort of stuff, but they had a timeline. I'm sure we've all worked on those projects that are driven by timelines because we're not renewing that contract, or we've signed a new contract, or my favourite, we've already booked the marketing time, like the ads have already been scheduled. That was a horrible project. So there's no real size. MVP doesn't have to be small. It can be large, but as long as you're applying the same sort of thinking to it. If we weren't applying MVP thinking, that thing would have been twice as big. So as I mentioned, some of these things are bootstrapped, right? And that introduces an interesting idea. And I just want to touch on desensitization a little bit. It's a bit of a tangent, bear with me, please. As a consultancy, these are some of the smallest projects that we do because it's someone that's come to us, maybe they're an engineer and they're, a domain leader in their field or something. They've got an idea about how to make their job a lot easier, and they think if it works for them, it'll work for other people too, and maybe they can sell that. Help everybody out, make some money, great. They'll come to us, they don't have their own team, so they'll come to us and say, look, we've got this idea, can we build this thing? And maybe we'll do a proof of concept, maybe we'll move into an MVP, and it will be one of the smallest projects we do. It will be one of the biggest investments of that individual's life, because it's a small project for us might be $40,000. A big like $40,000 of my money, I'd be terrified betting on an idea, which is what we're doing. I'm far too risk adverse, I couldn't do it. But it's happened, right? And look, most of the time it works out. But I think we get a bit desensitized to that. And the reason I'm talking about that is this is something to bring into the conversations that we're having with people when we're talking about MVPs. A lot of it is about money, particularly bootstrapped ones. And when we surface that money in the discussions around scope, the conversations usually change very quickly. If we think we want to push back on a feature suggestion, or even just in a story, there's 2 AC maybe that we think feel unnecessary for an MVP. We're going beyond minimal. It'll be viable with the other 4, let's drop these 2 off. If we just talk about, I don't think this is necessary, and the founder goes, well, I think we do, that's really just about, how well do I understand your problem space versus how well do you understand it? How well do I understand what your users need versus what you think the users need? When you change that conversation to be about money, it changes completely. And you say, these are great ideas, but if we drop these things 2 off, I think it's going to save us like a week, or maybe it's a day or something like that. If you can extend that, and usually that's enough for someone to go, hang on, you're talking about saving my money? I'm listening now. When you can extend that and say, we could use that time to do this thing instead that they've wanted to do as well, then you start trading features that they want for the money that they're spending. That becomes a really rich conversation, because then you're not discounting someone's idea at all. You're just saying, well, we've got a finite amount of money. Should we do this or should we do this? If we do this but a little bit different, that gives us more to play with here. And again, you do not need to be a project manager to be having these sorts of discussions. I'd say, as a software developer, for those in the room, I think you're a much better place to have these discussions, because you're looking at the story and estimating in your head, because it's what we do. and we're saying, yep, fine, 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 looking through the AC, that's fine. That's a pain for whatever reason. But you can explain that, and that can help influence those discussions. Some aren't bootstrapped though. Some don't have money as a driver, and like I said, the big one before is a good example. It was based around timelines. They were trying to get to market because I think they had a contract that they didn't want to renew. And we seem to get a lot of work like that too. People buy these really big expensive tools and then decide that they're really big and expensive and don't want to use them anymore, and then want to build something instead to replace that. But we're not paying the next contract and it expires in 3 months. And you're like, great, should have called us 4 months ago. So these are typically our enterprise customers, but the same logic still applies and you should still be asking the same questions. So, what are the questions that we can ask to help define these MVPs? What's the goal? If you ever worked on a project and you just have felt like you do not understand why we're even doing this project. There was nobody, and then most of the room put their hand up. It's okay, this is a safe space. I don't know any of your bosses, even yours. We always need to start by understanding the goal, and I encourage everybody to ask. It's not an offensive question. I don't think anyone should ever be upset about asking, I don't understand like the drivers for this project. I just want to better understand why we're doing this. You use the business terms, and then they really like it because then you're talking their language. So you don't talk about why we're doing this. You say, like, what are the benefits to this? What's the return on investment, etc. And for MVPs, it can be a lot. Are we responding to a competitor that's getting something out to market soon, or they've just gone to market with something that is at risk of taking our customers away? Are we chasing seed funding and there's a particular conference we want to do demos at or something like that? But in that case, do you need an MVP or is a demo fine? Just understanding that. And there's a theme here. Most of this is all about shared understanding. How much work are you creating by cutting corners now? Now that's phrased a bit one-sided, but tech debt is insanely powerful when it's used properly. And these are one of the levers, we'll talk about levers that developers can pull in a bit, but this is one of the levers that we can pull, right? But at a feature level, we say things like, let's just build the front end and defer the admin screens. So maybe the admin screens were the last 2 bars on there. We're just going to build the front end and the back end and let the users go for it and start getting that revenue or get to market or whichever we need. And that might be fine. There's no admin screens to update reference data or lookups or configurations or something like that. That might be fine if you're still sticking around to do that stuff manually down the track. But if you're not, then that's a big problem. And a lot of work that we do is building stuff for people that don't have their own teams. So we need to have conversations about this up front. And it's a trade-off, and it's really up to them. We can make recommendations, but it's your money, and we can build more of the features for the users and go for it. But there is a risk that if you need to change these lookups or you need to update this date range or whichever, these configuration items, and the project's finished, you can call us up and we can do it, but you can't manage that yourself. So that's going to be more money to make these changes directly into the database or however they're being done. Either is fine, either is acceptable. You don't have to build an admin screen for every lookup in your system, as long as you've got a way to update those lookups in your system, or you're very confident they'll never change. Although, how many times have you had to update the lookups that never change? Yeah, that's less hands than I thought. So that's a tricky one, but it's a question to ask. What can the team afford to maintain? Similar vein, but think about feature changes over time. Should you be doing a bit more of the gold plating up front because there's going to be no team around to maintain it later? Or can you cut them knowing that it's okay and we're going to rely on that revenue model to start coming in to pay for more development work? Sorry, and I should add, afford doesn't always just mean money either, it can be time. So if it's an in-house product or a line of business application for your company or something like that, it might just not be what can you afford to maintain in terms of, we've got the money to do it, but does your team of developers have the time to be going in and doing this extra stuff for this feature, or should you build a few things to self-service, that sort of thing? What are the good problems to have? So let's say we're working in a competitive domain. We're selling clouds. Clouds are really hot right now. We're confident. Our business model is we're going to have 100,000 users on this by the end of the year. Are you though? Do you need the sort of network infrastructure put in place so that you can handle Black Friday like a JB Hi-Fi? Or is that not really a problem when you're selling clouds to farmers and they really just sort of log on once a year and do that sort of thing? It'd be a great problem to have to solve, needing to service 100,000 people at the same time, or have a mad rush on Black Friday, or go viral on Reddit or whichever. But sometimes those problems you don't need to solve up front. You can deal with that and say, cool, now we've got a great problem, let's go and solve it now. Maybe that's not acceptable. Depends on if your kinds of good problems that might come up are too time sensitive to be able to respond to. You could have an auto-scaling infrastructure that goes up to, 11, but it might be fine if you can suffer a couple of hours of downtime, or not downtime, but a couple of hours of reduced performance while you just call someone and get them to turn the system up to 11 instead. So think about what are the good problems to have. And at the end, once you've gone through all of these questions, come back and check, is it still viable? Is it still a product? Now for developers, and not just for developers actually, but once we get to actually delivering this, first thing is to remove assumptions. And this also does not just apply to MVPs, this is everything that we ever do. Just clarify assumptions, don't make assumptions, but particularly in MVPs, because we're usually talking on shorter timeframes, assumptions consume a lot more time and are a lot riskier. Because if you do make an assumption and get it wrong, you might have spent a week and need a week to correct that wrong assumption. That's 2 weeks on what might be a 3-week project. A 3-month project. That's really hard to catch up to. If you do that on a 2-year project, that's not as big a deal. So you need to remove assumptions. There's a whole ways that you need to go about that. You need the people you're building it for to be responsive and receptive to questions, constant questions. But you set up that expectation from the start. It's like, cool, if we're going to do this for you, and we're going to do it for you in 6 months, 3 months, whatever, you need to be available to us, X, Y, Z, 3 a.m., whatever you think you need. Don't do that. Don't be that person either. So that you can remove assumptions fast. Always come back to the goals, and that's why we spent the first half of this talk talking about the goals. Every time you pick up a story, every time you pick up a piece of functionality to test, or pick up a pull request, a code review, come back to those goals again. Why are we building this thing? And that's why I say everybody needs to know. Why are we building this? Does this actually help us? It's never too late to ask those questions and course correct. When it is too late is when you've already built things and it's already gone. Explain the trade-offs. And this is what I was talking about, not just saying, I don't think this is a good idea, I don't think we need this feature. It's, I don't think we need this feature because we could do this instead, and it's going to add a week to this story. So talk about what you're trading off by including X, Y, or Z scope. That's how you control the scope. Obviously, that needs to be a collaborative effort. As a developer, I'm not in charge of the scope. As a product owner, I need to understand that I need to take the advice from the people I'm working with about how complex things are. What I love are the clients that say, I think we need to do this thing. I think it's a day's worth of work. I'm like, you've never written a day's worth of code. I have one client completely non-technical. He's got a mechanic background. He's eerily accurate. I think he's a closet developer, which I wouldn't blame him. MVPs, again, short timeframes. Shorten the feedback cycle to extremes. Don't wait for a sprint review to show a feature. Don't wait for any sort of bookend or point to do it. If you've got a thing that you think is done enough to be able to show, call whoever you're working with, screen share it. Hey, I've done this thing, how does it look? I will do this just after doing front end, before I've got back end on it. Even if we've maybe got some low fidelity mock-ups in the stories or whichever, once I've done a high fidelity version of it or something, I'll usually do that. Different people like to approach the work differently. If you're full stack, you might like to do the back end first and then put the screen on top. I do it the other way for this exact reason. I can call up after I've done the screen and say, hey, this doesn't do anything yet, so don't bother clicking it, but does this look right? And they're like, oh, no, I thought I'd be able to, yeah, okay, great. We've saved some work. Understand the ratio. This is the ratio of how minimum are we going, how viable are we going, how much product are we trying to build. And set your expectations up really early as well. A good example I like to use of this is for estimations when you're talking about work. It doesn't matter what sort of estimation process you're using. It could be story points, hours, days, pigeons, I don't know how you do your work. But set the expectation when you're talking about these features and when you're talking about scoping and say, all right, so this is probably, this is probably twice as big as that other one. Is that, like, is it worth that amount of time or that amount of effort? I have one client, we just talk in hards. How many hards is this? 6 hards. Oh no, I don't want to do that. We've been working together long enough that we've got a shared understanding of what a hard is. He thinks it's about a day, so it's fine, it works for us. Be prepared to roll with some ambiguity, because a lot of the time we don't know if what we're doing is the right thing until you've given it to someone to play with. So be happy to go with, okay, well, we think we understand the first half of this feature, let's try and build that out and see how it feels, and we'll go from there. And to do a lot of that, prioritise just-in-time conversations as much as you can over emails and such, which are a lot slower. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to speed up, sorry. When we're talking about requirements, think about must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, won't-haves. For an MVP, it should probably just be the must-haves. But it's a good way to start. If anyone can explain to me why we use that acronym when must is MU, please come and see me after the talk, because I've always wanted to know. Sorry, and don't just do this at the start of the project. Again, do this every time you pick up a new story, every time you pick up a new feature. Manage the scope creep. Scope creep is what kills MVPs, because once we get something up, especially if we feel like we're getting a little bit ahead, once we get the thing up and get the feedback, it's like, oh yeah, cool. Let's just move that to there and do this and add this thing, and then we're good. And we're like, okay, could, again, great idea. How about we do that last bit in the next version so that we can keep moving on this? Listen, discuss, challenge, push as much as you can. So the levers we can pull as devs. Your tech choices. This is not the time to learn Polyacondensata JS or whatever the cool new thing is now that doesn't have an NPM vulnerability. Use stuff that you know if you're on a short time frame, or use stuff that you know is going to deliver you value quickly. Look at things like Supabase if you haven't looked at them before. For MVPs, that might be completely acceptable. And sometimes it's even, we think we can use something that's, if you're not familiar with Supabase, sorry, that's like a back end in a tin. It'll give you APIs and authentication and data and the lot. There's arguments about whether it would support, a real production system with 1,000 concurrent users and things like that. Great problem to have. It may be that getting to market is more important than that, and you just want to use something like that and accept some rebuild later. Oh, I'm getting the hurry on. I see you. I see you. Thank you. I appreciate you. This is one I always like to upset people with. Think about the sort of tests you're writing. You should obviously write tests, but you probably don't need to write all of the tests all of the time for all of the lines of code. I never work towards a code coverage percentage. I just work on covering business logic, business rules, replicating business rules in the tests. They're the things that are going to make or break the business if those things are wrong, if we're charging people the wrong amount, if we're not calculating tax properly, if we're whatever. Yes, maybe later, add some technical debt if you think there's sketchy areas, go back and put tests around the dragons, etc. later. But different clients have different appetites for a few bugs as well. and you can get to market a lot quicker if your client is okay with that. If it's an internal line of business application, they probably don't mind seeing a few exceptions in the first couple of weeks. You probably don't need to spend 4 weeks hardening it to the point where you'll never see an exception. Documentation. This is an easy one because none of us like writing documentation. I actually do, but that's probably a whole nother talk that no one will come to. How much documentation has value at the moment, and what sort of detail in that documentation is valuable? Things that are always valuable: onboarding documentation. When you come back to this 6 months later, you're going to remember how to run it up. A tech stack, that sort of thing. Do you need full functional documentation at this point? Probably not. Have a think about that. And the architecture, which we've talked about. Do you need 1 million users? Do you need 10,000? Really? This is a conversation I have quite a lot. Actually, the new one is people coming to us and saying, I've got this idea, and when we build it out, we want to build an MVP, but also we're going to make it a SaaS product because we think we can sell this to other people. I'm like, can you? Let's focus our effort, because that's a whole different build that you probably don't want to pay for now, before you know if it works for you. And UIs, keep it simple, use off-the-shelf libraries, don't fight the frameworks, you don't need to hand-roll everything, not in an MVP. If you're Apple, if you're Netflix, if you're whoever, you want custom things, but you're not building MVPs either. You're building a gold-plated product for launch because that's the expectation. Not everybody needs to do that sort of thing, so think about what you can change in the UI. I'm going to skip the takeaways because I think you've probably already seen them through the rest of it. I'm going to leave you with this quote, which is in... Does anyone here speak French? Oh, can you give me a pronunciation of this, please? Can we get a microphone down here? Because I always butcher it with my le mieux est l'ennemi du bien. Now, how does it actually sound?
Le mieux est l'ennemi du bien.
That's what I said. Thank you. This is a quote by Voltaire. Does anybody know it? Not you. You do? So if you're translating poorly, you get perfect is the enemy of good, right? Perfect is not an MVP, unless that's in your definition of viability, but then it's probably not going to be very minimal. So keep this in mind as you go through things. Any questions? Do I have time for questions?
We'll take 1 or 2 questions.
I have time for half a question.
It's got to be a really good question.
Yes, no questions only.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I think this is really relevant to a broader range of MVPs now. Software, this is just the way that the questioning that you should probably do. But what about quality? You mentioned a little bit about testing.
Yep. That depends on the appetite. So like I said, what's the appetite for a few bugs? Is it a line of business application and you know the 5 people that are going to be using it so they can just ping you on Teams if there's a problem? Or is this a go-to-market where we're trying to get people to spread the word to their friends and attract a revenue model that way? That's going to influence the conversation about quality. So that's a question that you ask at the very start. And you have that in your mind the whole time through. Like, what are we going for?
I think we can take 2 more questions.
You're the first French person I've had in my audience to be able to do that. Thank you, by the way.
Thank you for the presentations. How much the MVP experience has changed ever since AI has been introduced?
Unfortunately, the crowd has decided I'm not allowed to talk about AI. But you
I give
have, so
permission.
I'm going to. I'll give you the really quick answer. It's a fascinating one. And it ties in really tightly to what he just asked about quality. Think about the points that we talked about around the viability, what the team can maintain. A product needs to be maintainable. How much AI can you build into that? I think AI is fantastic for the demos, for the proof of concepts, where you're trying to test the waters, you're trying to test an idea. You can build 80% of an MVP very quickly with AI, and then you can, like with something like a V0 or a Lovable or whichever, switch over to some different agentic agents and build out the last 20% you think you need. But it comes down to the quality, because the quality is still not always there. Depends on your prompts, depends on the guardrails you put in place, on a whole bunch of stuff. But it does make MVPs quicker if you're using them to an acceptable quality standard. Sorry, everybody who didn't want to talk about AI.
One more question.
One more, I've got over here.
Hang on.
The question was, how long does it take to develop an MVP? That depends on the sizes, the tree map, right? It just completely depends on what we've decided, how much we've scoped these things out. There's no answer for that, unfortunately. There's no. So we've had MVPs that have taken us 18 months because that was our enterprise example that I gave before. That was huge. We still applied MVP logic to it. We've had other MVPs that we've done, not proof of concepts, but actual MVPs that we've delivered in, I think, probably 6 or 7 weeks. One of the examples I gave with those feature sets before was, I think, a 6-week build. 6 weeks to developers.
What would you say the key roles are in creating an MVP, like people to have?
Like job title roles?
Yeah, like expertise or, so
like
you
expertise.
mentioned marketing wasn't there when one of your MVPs went out, and that kind of was a big thing. So what would you say would be the key people?
Also depends on the kind of consultants. It depends. It also depends on the kind of thing. If it's a line of business application, then you don't need a marketing team. If it's something you're trying to go to market with, then you do, because otherwise no one's going to hear about it. I think for development, you always need. I like to always have a couple of developers, because I like the idea of people being able to, validate and challenge each other. You need the person with the idea that can actually answer the questions, and they need to be available to make that project successful. Because sometimes there's someone with a great idea, but they've got 15 other great ideas and you never hear from them again. And you also need, not a role, but you need a bunch of other skill sets in that team. We will often build them just with a couple of developers, a principal like myself, to kind of do a lot of the validation and the challenging and the, project management stuff, very minimal, and whoever the actual founder is. And that's usually the person with the idea and the person who's paying for things, and they're usually the tester as well.
Cool.
Right.
So if anyone here wants to reach out to you, what's the best way on social media?
I am Chris with Pants, all one word, everywhere on social media. I'm not active on Twitter anymore, but pretty much everywhere else you'll find me. Just one word, Chris with Pants. Chris Gilbert's a very generic name, and when I tried to sign up for a Gmail account, that was really hard. Thank you so much for coming, everybody.